Hello, today is our 36th day of 365 Fear Nots. We're going to end up in 1 Chronicles 22, but we're going to finish up 2 Kings and get there. So let's go ahead and open in prayer and get started. Lord, I just thank you for this day, and I thank you that you've given us your word. I thank you for this beautiful Sunday and all that we get to do in it. And I pray that you would just continue to bless this time that we spend in your word. I pray that anyone that hears it would be blessed by it, and that you would be able to show us something new that we can learn from today. And I just pray that you would be with us at this time. And I thank you and I praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So we again are going to be starting in 2 Kings 18. And we saw that Hezekiah at 25 years old reigned Judah for 29 years, trusting the Lord like no one before or after him. That's significant because everybody else, not everybody, but almost everybody else was evil. So it's awesome that we see that he was trusting the Lord. He even had more than one chapter dedicated to him, because we see in 2 Kings 19, Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, who killed 185 Assyrian soldiers in the night. So giving Judah the victory at that time. And then in chapter 20, Hezekiah's prayers grant him 15 more years of life. Now you would think, because he had this boil on him or whatever, and the prophet came to him and said, get your affairs in order because you're going to die. Thanks for whoever's watching. And Hezekiah instead prays to God that he would extend his life. So God does extend his life, and in this extension of his life, instead of using it for the good and making great choices and continuing to do right in God's sight, he invites these Babylonian envoys that come to his kingdom to see all of his treasuries and everything he has in his storehouses and his vaults of all of his treasures, which guarantees his kingdom's fall after his death. Almost like, you should have just keeled over. I don't know. So yeah, that's what he's told after he does that, after he's guaranteed 15 more years of life. So after Hezekiah, Manasseh takes the throne at 12 years old, and he reigns Judah for 55 years. Yet he does evil in the sight of God, as does Ammon, who takes over the throne at 22 years and reigns Judah for 2 years, who also does evil. So even though Hezekiah had 3 chapters dedicated to him and did right in God's sight, he failed to pass that on to the next generation. So it's an important fact to see that even though you do good and that you worship God, it's important to pass that knowledge on to your kids, right? So chapter 22 of 2 Kings, we see Josiah at 8 years old reigns Judah for 31 years. He does right. He finds the book of the law. He repairs the temple and prevents the kingdom's disaster during his lifetime. Starting at 8 years old. How awesome is that? Now, in chapter 23, Josiah renewed the covenant with the people, but, always a but, right? His son Josiah, at 22 years old, reigned Judah for 2 months, doing evil, which means he didn't pass on the righteousness of God to his kid. And Joachim, at 25 years, reigned Judah for 11 years, also doing evil. In chapter 24, Jehoiachin, at 18 years old, reigned Judah for 3 months. Not a great guy. Hi, Bob. Thanks for coming in and watching. Reigned the kingdom for 3 months in 2 Kings of 24, doing evil. Zedekiah, at 21 years old, reigned Judah for 11 years, also doing evil. And in the final chapter of 2 Kings, we see chapter 25, Jerusalem falls under the Babylonians, and Jehoiachin is released under the new Babylonian king, eating at his table all the rest of his days. Not sure why he got that, but, he got to only be king for 2 months because he was evil, so I guess, God was just going to give him something nice the last few days of his life. So then we go on to 1 Chronicles 1. And you might have remembered some of these stories because they were in 1 Samuel. 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles take the same stories and expound on them at different points in time. So 1 and 2 Samuel was written by Samuel. 1 and 2 Kings were written by some of the other scholars at that time. And then 1 and 2 Chronicles adds in the things that happened during those kings' lifetime and more. So we get more insight into each of those kings and priests and things during that time. So now we're in 1 Chronicles, and 1 Chronicles 1 is a historical record from Adam to Abraham and the family of Abraham. In 1 Chronicles 2, Israel to Judah to Perez to Hezron to Ram to Boaz to Jesse to David. All of those are touched on, and you get the genealogy of those there. In 1 Chronicles 3, we see the sons of David, the kings of Judah, and the royal line after the exile. In 1 Chronicles 4, we see the clans of Judah, starting with Simeon. In 5, we see the clans of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. In chapter 6, we see the clan of Levi and the temple musicians. In chapter 7, we see Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher. And then finally, we get to chapter 8, where we see Saul, the Benjamite, which we've been touching on in 1 and 2 Samuel as you are going along with us in our group study that we do at night and our couple study on You're Stuck With Me. We've been going through Saul and David, and so this is just an expansion on that. Chapter 9, we see the people of Jerusalem taken captive for unfaithfulness and the genealogy of Saul. We see chapter 10, how Saul takes his life for unfaithfulness to the Lord, not keeping the Lord's word, and consulting a medium. Just a long list of stuff Saul screwed up at. And then we go on to David. In chapter 11, David becomes the king of Israel. He conquers Jerusalem and has a long list of mighty warriors. Now, not only mighty warriors of David are included, but in chapter 12, we see that many warriors join David, and many others at Hebron join David. In chapter 13, David, while incorrectly trying to transport the ark back, causes Uzziah's death, and in his anger with the Lord, leaves the ark at Obed-Edom's house. Now, you may think that's not a big deal. Why would David get angry about something like that? Well, he had them just throw the ark on the back of a cart, and then Uzzah, who was trying to steady the ark, trying to help out God, trying to not let the ark fall, reaches out his hand and grabs the ark, which causes him to die. Then nobody wants to touch the ark, so they just ditch it at Obed-Edom's house, who is then blessed until the ark moves. So in chapter 14, we see that David's house and his family, we hear more about them, and then the defeat of the Philistines causes fame to spread and the nations to fear. So David and his house continue to grow and strengthen, and then they conquer the Philistines. So everyone is coming under David's rule. And now David in chapter 15 decides, hey, I probably should get the ark from Obed-Edom's house. Maybe I should figure out how to correctly move the ark, which he does. And then they take it back to Jerusalem by the Levites carrying it on the poles that God had designed for them to do that on. And they're dancing and they're singing, and David is also dancing and singing. Thank you for whoever's watching. I see Bob and someone else. Which causes his wife Michal to despise him in her heart. Now, she had originally loved David, her and her brother Jonathan, and but now seeing that he was worshiping God and praising God in front of everybody made her despise him, which causes me to think maybe she should have been in the street with her husband and she wouldn't have despised him. But hey, you know, that's what happens when you want to judge people instead of being out there where you're supposed to be with your husband. So in chapter 16, you see they ministered before the ark, and then everyone returned home to bless their families. Chapter 17, God promises to bless David's house forever, and David prays and praises God for his blessings. In chapter 18, David has many victories and appoints his officials. In chapter 19, David defeats the Ammonites. In chapter 20, David captured took Rabbah, and then their king's crown for himself. He had like this amazing crown. It like details it in detail, and he just places it on his own head. Says, hey, I'm the king of Rabbah now. And also the Philistines fell at the hands of David and his men. So in chapter 21, now this is the first thing we've seen that David screws up at. And you know, he's a human, so he falls short. And I appreciate they include this in here because they could choose to not to, but they do. So David takes a census, and he commands this census, which is evil in the sight of God, because he's counting how many fighting men he has, which I guess it's kind of like saying, you know, I don't know if I have enough fighting men, I need to count them, which instead of trusting that God will take care of this, and he accepts the blame on his family over the God blaming the people, and then he offers sacrifices for forgiveness, and the Lord relents. So he shouldn't have did what he did, but he did do what he did. Then he asks for forgiveness and God forgives him, but he takes on the blame on him and his family instead of on the people, and we kind of see how that falls into line with the rest of his family. So in chapter 22, which is where we end up, David prepares all for the temple his son Solomon will build, because David cannot build the temple for God because he shed too much blood. So out of all of that we do to get to where we are today, we see that 2 Kings 18 through 25 talks about Jerusalem's kings and their fall. In 1 Chronicles 1 through 7, we see the historical records from Adam to the clans of Judah. In 1 Chronicles 8 through 10, we talk about Saul. In 1 Chronicles 11 through 22, we talk about David. So our key verse for today is, you will have success if you carefully observe the decrees the Lord gave. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. And this is David speaking to Solomon on what he needs to do to prepare to build the temple for the Lord. He wants his son to be successful. He's telling him not to be afraid of doing this task that God has set before him. And fear, the aim that we see here is that fear makes you unsteady in the path of success. The key verse was 1 Chronicles 22:13, if I didn't say that. Fear makes you unsteady in the path of success. God has set each of us on a path, and that path can be successful if we choose to not fear. As we take that path step by step, God will continue to guide us on that path. But when we allow fear to come on that path with us, it makes our path unsteady. And God is telling us to be strong and courageous, to not be afraid or discouraged, because he has set us on the path that we're on. And if we are on God's path, there's no reason to fear. So our application and our prayer for today is, Lord, I pray that you restore and establish me, that I may have success and favor. Not just to harbor it for myself, but to be a blessing that restores and establishes others. We should be praying that God gives us success and favor, not to be able to harbor that for us, but to be able to give success and favor to others. And that's the point of being on the path that God has given us, that we can be a blessing to others, that we can point others to Christ. So I hope as you see the recap of all of that today, that you can see that God has given you a path to be on, that fear has no place on that path as you continue to walk forward boldly in the faith that God has given you. So be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged. God has set this path before you. Thanks so much. God bless.